The Silent Castration, 10 Habits Destroying Male Vitality. We are witnessing a silent physiological collapse. Modernity has declared war on male vitality, stripping away potency through invisible habits ingrained in our daily routines. This is a systematic dismantling of endocrine function, vascular integrity, and neurological drive. The data is terrifying. Testosterone levels are plummeting globally, and the culprits are hiding in plain sight, masquerading as comfort. To reclaim your biological edge, you must ruthlessly eradicate the toxins poisoning your potential. The investigation begins with the most pervasive vascular assassin known to science.
The vascular assassin, the systemic ravages of smoking. To understand the cataclysmic impact of smoking on male performance, one must look past the superficial warnings of lung cancer and respiratory failure to the microscopic battleground of the circulatory system. An erection is fundamentally a hydraulic event. It is a phenomenon entirely dependent on the rapid pressurized movement of blood into the spongiform tissues of the penis. Smoking is not merely a bad habit, it is a direct act of sabotage against the very hydraulic machinery required for male sexual function. When a man inhales cigarette smoke, he is introducing a volatile cocktail of over 7,000 chemicals, including arsenic, formaldehyde, and hydrogen cyanide, directly into his bloodstream. Within seconds, a systemic assault begins, one that targets the endothelium, the single layer of cells lining every blood vessel in the human body. The endothelium is the gatekeeper of virility. Its primary function in the context of sexual performance is the production of nitric oxide, a critical signaling molecule that tells the smooth muscles surrounding the arteries to relax. This relaxation allows the vessels to dilate, accommodating the rush of blood necessary to achieve and maintain an erection. Nicotine and the free radicals found in tobacco smoke wage a chemical war on the endothelium. They strip away this delicate lining, inhibiting the production of nitric oxide. Without this molecule, the open the floodgate signal is never fully received. The arteries remain constricted, stiff, and unresponsive. This state of chronic vasoconstriction means that even when the brain signals arousal, the body is physically incapable of responding with the necessary vigor. The result is a slow, insidious decline in rigidity, often dismissed as stress or aging, until it manifests as clinical erectile dysfunction. However, the damage extends far beyond immediate vasoconstriction. We must analyze the long-term structural degradation known as atherosclerosis. Smoking accelerates the deposition of plaque, a mixture of fat, cholesterol, and calcium, onto the arterial walls. While this is commonly discussed in the context of coronary heart disease, the penile arteries are significantly smaller than the coronary arteries. They are the canary in the coal mine.
A man who smokes may experience erectile failure years before he suffers a heart attack, because the narrower vessels of the reproductive system become clogged first. This is a progressive calcifying process. The elastic, responsive nature of a healthy vascular system is replaced by rigid, narrowed pipes that can no longer support the hemodynamic pressure required for intercourse. The smoker is essentially turning his vascular system into a rusted, clogged plumbing network, expecting it to perform like a high-precision hydraulic pump. The historical context of this self-inflicted castration is one of the great ironies of the 20th century. For decades, the tobacco industry utilized a marketing strategy that inextricably linked smoking to rugged, unassailable masculinity. The archetype of the Marlboro Man, weather-beaten, stoic, cigarette dangling from his lip, was projected onto the global consciousness as the pinnacle of male potency. Millions of men bought into this imagery, unaware that the very product they consumed to signal their virility was chemically dismantling it. This was a triumph of psychological manipulation over physiological reality. While the advertisements promised distinctiveness and power, the biological reality was a rapid acceleration of vascular aging. By the time the medical community established the irrefutable link between smoking and impotence, the cultural programming ran so deep that generations of men continued to smoke, effectively choosing a fleeting nicotine rush over their long-term sexual autonomy. Furthermore, the toxicity of smoking penetrates the genetic level, assaulting the very blueprint of life, DNA. Research has shown that the oxidative stress caused by smoking fragments the DNA within sperm cells. This is not just a matter of fertility, though the reduction in sperm count and motility is well documented. It is a matter of genetic integrity. Men who smoke are producing gametes with compromised structural stability, leading to higher rates of miscarriage in partners and potential developmental issues in offspring. The smoker's body is in a constant state of inflammation, a physiological panic where resources are diverted to repair cellular damage rather than maintain optimal reproductive function. The testes, sensitive to oxidative stress, suffer from reduced steroidogenesis, the process of creating testosterone. Thus,
Smoking delivers a dual blow. It destroys the delivery system, blood vessels, and sabotages the fuel source, testosterone.
We must also address the modern evolution of this habit, vaping and e-cigarettes. A dangerous narrative has emerged, suggesting that because vaping eliminates the tar and combustion of traditional cigarettes, it is a safe alternative for vascular health. This is a profound misconception. While some carcinogens are reduced, the primary vasoactive agent, nicotine, remains present, often in significantly higher concentrations in modern pod-based systems. Nicotine is a potent vasoconstrictor, regardless of the delivery method. It triggers the sympathetic nervous system, inducing a fight or flight response that pulls blood away from the extremities and reproductive organs toward the core and muscles. A man chain vaping high nicotine fluids is keeping his body in a state of perpetual vascular clampdown. The endothelial damage caused by the flavoring agents and propellants in vape juice is an unfolding medical disaster, the full scope of which we are only beginning to understand. The clean aesthetic of vaping masks a dirty biological truth. It is still strangling the blood flow required for performance. The psychological component of smoking addiction further compounds the issue. Nicotine hijacks the brain's dopamine reward pathways, creating a dependency loop that mimics the satisfaction of biological needs. When a smoker feels stress, often the stress of sexual anxiety or performance issues, their instinct is to reach for a cigarette or vape. This action releases a momentary flood of dopamine, calming the mind, but simultaneously floods the body with vasoconstrictors that ensure the physical problem gets worse. It is a vicious cycle of self-medication, where the cure is the cause. The smoker believes the cigarette settles his nerves, allowing him to perform, when in reality it is chemically ensuring his failure. Breaking the cycle requires a confrontation with the uncomfortable truth that the sensation of relief provided by smoking is an illusion, a temporary masking of the systemic rot occurring beneath the skin. Ultimately, the cessation of smoking is the single most effective biohack a man can employ to restore performance. The body's capacity for repair is remarkable. Within weeks of quitting, endothelial function begins to improve, nitric oxide production resumes, and the vascular rigidity begins to soften. However,
for the long-term smoker, some damage may be irreversible. The calcification of arteries does not simply vanish. This underscores the urgency of the quit immediately directive. Every cigarette smoked is another layer of plaque, another dead endothelial cell, another fracture in the hydraulic integrity of the erection. To continue smoking is to voluntarily participate in the slow-motion destruction of one's own manhood, trading the vitality of the future for a toxic inhalation in the present.
2. The liquid castrator, the hormonal and neurological collapse of heavy alcohol drinking. If smoking is the assassin of the blood vessels, alcohol is the poison of the endocrine system. The cultural romance with alcohol, the image of the whiskey-drinking statesman or the beer-swilling laborer, masks a devastating biological reality. Ethanol is a toxin that systematically dismantles the hormonal architecture of masculinity. While society often equates the ability to hold one's liquor with manliness, the physiological truth is that heavy alcohol consumption creates a state of chemical castration. To understand this, we must dive deep into the metabolic chaos that ensues when alcohol enters the male body, specifically its war against testosterone, the primary driver of male vitality, muscle mass, and sexual desire. The assault begins in the Leydig cells of the testes. These cells are the microscopic factories responsible for synthesizing testosterone. Alcohol is directly toxic to these cells. Chronic heavy drinking creates a state of oxidative stress within the testicular tissue, physically damaging the machinery required to produce male hormones. But the damage is not just local, it is systemic. Alcohol disrupts the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. This is the command center of the endocrine system. The hypothalamus signals the pituitary gland to release luteinizing hormone, LH, which travels to the testes to trigger testosterone production. Alcohol acts as a suppressor at every level of this chain. It dampens the signal from the brain and dulls the reception in the testes. The result is a plummeting T count. You are essentially turning off the master switch of your libido. However, the most insidious effect of heavy drinking is not just the suppression of testosterone, but the active promotion of estrogen. This process occurs primarily in the liver. The liver is the body's filtration plant, responsible for metabolizing hormones and clearing excess estrogen from the bloodstream. When a man drinks heavily, the liver prioritizes the metabolism of ethanol because it identifies it as a poison that must be neutralized immediately. Consequently, the metabolism of other substances, including hormones, is deprioritized. Excess estrogen that should be filtered out begins to accumulate in the blood. Furthermore, heavy alcohol consumption increases the activity of the aromatase enzyme, which actively converts existing testosterone into estrogen.
This leads to a feminizing effect on the male body. Muscle mass decreases, body fat increases, particularly around the chest and hips, and sexual drive evaporates. The heavy drinker is unknowingly engaged in a hormone replacement therapy that transitions him away from his biological prime. Beyond the hormonal landscape, we must examine the neurological impact. An erection is a neurovascular event. It requires a precise signal from the brain to travel down the spinal cord and trigger a physical response. Alcohol is a central nervous system depressant. It slows down brain activity and dampens nerve sensitivity. This creates a profound disconnect between the brain and the body. A man may feel psychologically aroused, often due to the lowered inhibitions alcohol provides, but his nervous system is too sedated to transmit that arousal to the genitals effectively. This is the mechanism behind the colloquial whiskey dick. The spirit is willing, but the wiring is deadened. This neurological dampening also affects sensation. Even if performance is achieved, the sensitivity required to reach climax is often blunted, leading to delayed ejaculation or an inability to finish, which can be just as psychologically damaging as the inability to start. The relationship between alcohol and sleep is another critical, often overlooked factor in male performance. Testosterone production is circadian. The vast majority of it is replenished during the deep REM cycles of sleep. While alcohol may help a man pass out faster, it utterly destroys sleep architecture. It fragments sleep, causes frequent awake dreams, and suppresses REM sleep. A heavy drinker may sleep for 8 hours but wake up with the hormonal profile of someone who slept for 3. By robbing himself of restorative sleep, the drinker prevents his body from replenishing the testosterone spent during the day. He wakes up in a deficit, reaches for caffeine, and perhaps more alcohol later to cope, and the cycle of depletion accelerates. This chronic sleep deprivation raises cortisol levels, the stress hormone, which acts as a direct antagonist to testosterone, further deepening the hole. We must also scrutinize the cultural paradox of liquid courage. For centuries, alcohol has been used as a social lubricant, a tool to bypass anxiety and facilitate courtship. Men drink to numb the fear of rejection or the pressure to perform. Yet this reliance creates a psychological dependency that erodes true confidence.
When a man believes he needs a drink to be charismatic or sexual, he atrophies his natural social skills. The anxiety he tries to drown actually rebounds with greater intensity the next day, a phenomenon known as hangxiety. This state of heightened anxiety and physical depletion creates a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure. The hangover is not just a headache, it is a state of systemic inflammation and hormonal drought where libido is non-existent. If a man drinks heavily on Friday and Saturday, he may spend Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday biologically recovering, leaving only a fraction of the week where he is actually operating at full capacity. The physical toll on the liver also leads to broader metabolic consequences like insulin resistance and weight gain. Beer and sugary mixers are calorically dense, leading to visceral fat accumulation. Visceral fat is not inert, it is metabolically active tissue that produces inflammatory cytokines and, crucially, more aromatase. This creates a feedback loop. Alcohol damages the liver and lowers testosterone. The body gains fat. The fat converts more testosterone into estrogen. The man feels more lethargic and depressed. He drinks to cope. This spiral leads to the dad bod physique, which is effectively a visible symptom of metabolic and hormonal dysfunction. The beer gut is a tombstone for testosterone. Furthermore, the impact of chronic alcohol abuse on the autonomic nervous system creates long-term neuropathy. Just as diabetes damages the nerves, chronic alcohol toxicity can lead to alcoholic neuropathy, where the nerves responsible for tactile sensation and autonomic control wither away. This damage can be permanent. A man may quit drinking, but if he has spent a decade saturating his nervous system in ethanol, the fine-tuned sensitivity required for peak sexual experience may never fully return. This is the grim reality that the alcohol industry's lifestyle marketing conceals. They sell the party, but the product delivers the hangover that lasts a lifetime. To reclaim performance, moderation is often an insufficient strategy for those who have already compromised their systems. For the high-performing male, the elimination of alcohol acts as a massive competitive advantage. Upon cessation, the liver regenerates, estrogen levels drop, testosterone rebounds, and sleep architecture restores itself. The fog lifts from the nervous system, allowing for the return of sharp, responsive reflexes.
The quit immediately directive here is not puritanical, it is practical. In a world that is constantly attacking male androgen levels through environmental toxins and stress, pouring a depressant and endocrine disruptor down one's throat is a strategic error of the highest order. It is a voluntary surrender of the biological edge that defines male vitality.
3. The nocturnal castration, the catastrophic biology of sleep deprivation. In the high-stakes arena of modern masculinity, there exists a pervasive, culturally enforced myth that sleep is a luxury for the weak, a passive state of inactivity that can be traded for productivity or entertainment. This narrative is not merely incorrect, it is biologically suicidal. Sleep deprivation is the single most efficient way to chemically castrate a healthy male without physical intervention. To understand why, we must dismantle the popular conception of sleep as rest and reframe it as production. The male body is a biological factory that operates on a strict shift schedule. During the waking hours, the body is in a state of catabolism, breaking down resources, expending energy, and accumulating cellular waste. It is only during the unconscious hours that the body switches to anabolism, the state of building, repairing, and synthesizing the hormones that define virility. When a man cuts his sleep from 8 hours to 5, he is not simply tired the next day, he has shut down the factory before the daily quota of testosterone could be manufactured.
The relationship between sleep and testosterone is linear, brutal, and non-negotiable. The vast majority of a man's daily testosterone is released in pulses during the rapid eye movement REM cycles and the deep slow-wave sleep phases that occur primarily in the latter half of the night. This is a circadian rhythm, hardwired into the human genome over millions of years of evolution. The endocrine system uses sleep as the trigger to restart the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal HPG axis. When the eyes close and the brain enters specific wave patterns, the signal is sent to the testes to begin steroidogenesis. Research has shown that restricting sleep to 5 hours a night for just 1 week can reduce a healthy young man's testosterone levels by up to 15 to 20%. To put that in perspective, that is the equivalent of aging 10 to 15 years in a span of 7 days. A man in his prime who chronically undersleeps is walking around with the hormonal profile of a geriatric, voluntarily surrendering the vigor that constitutes his biological advantage. However, the suppression of testosterone is only half of the equation. The other half is the uncontrolled proliferation of cortisol. Cortisol is the body's primary stress hormone, evolved to help us handle immediate threats. In the modern context,
Sleep deprivation is interpreted by the body as a state of low-level emergency. The brain perceives the lack of recovery as a threat to survival, and in response, it keeps the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight mechanism, chronically activated. This results in elevated baseline cortisol levels. Cortisol and testosterone have an antagonistic relationship. They are biological enemies competing for the same precursors and signaling pathways. When cortisol is high, testosterone is low. By skipping sleep, a man creates a hormonal environment that is actively hostile to his own masculinity. He is bathing his tissues in a catabolic hormone that eats muscle, stores visceral fat, and kills libido, while simultaneously choking off the supply of the anabolic hormone required to reverse those effects. The consequences of this hormonal imbalance extend into the metabolic realm, creating a vicious cycle of physical decline. Sleep deprivation disrupts the regulation of ghrelin, the hunger hormone, and leptin, the satiety hormone. A sleep-deprived man experiences a primal, insatiable craving for high-calorie, sugary carbohydrates, the body's desperate attempt to get quick energy to compensate for the lack of restoration. This leads to rapid weight gain and insulin resistance. As adipose tissue fat accumulates, particularly around the midsection, it acts as an endocrine organ in itself, producing aromatase, the enzyme that converts testosterone into estrogen. Thus, the sleep-deprived man enters a doom loop. He sleeps less, his cortisol spikes, his testosterone drops, he gains fat. The fat converts his remaining testosterone into estrogen, and his sleep quality deteriorates further due to the metabolic strain. It is a perfect storm of physiological feminization, driven entirely by the refusal to close one's eyes. We must also examine the neurological waste management system known as the glymphatic system. Discovered relatively recently, this system acts as a plumbing network for the brain, flushing out neurotoxins and metabolic byproducts like beta-amyloid proteins that accumulate during waking hours. This flushing process occurs almost exclusively during deep sleep. When a man deprives himself of this cycle, his brain remains saturated with cellular trash. The cognitive fog, irritability, and lack of focus associated with sleep loss are symptoms of a dirty brain. In terms of sexual performance, this is catastrophic.
An erection is not just a hydraulic event, it is a neurovascular event, requiring sharp, clear signaling from the brain to the body. A neurotoxin-saturated brain struggles to transmit the signals of arousal efficiently. The libido, which starts in the mind, is dampened by the neurological fatigue, leading to a state of apathy where the very desire for intimacy feels like too much effort. The cultural backdrop of this crisis is the hustle culture and the ubiquity of artificial light. For the entirety of human history, men slept when it was dark and woke when it was light. The invention of the electric light bulb and subsequently the smartphone shattered this evolutionary alignment. We are now bathed in blue light, emitted from LEDs and screens well into the night. This blue light hits the retina and signals the pineal gland to halt the production of melatonin, the hormone that regulates the sleep-wake cycle. By scrolling through emails or social media at 11 p.m., a man is chemically tricking his brain into believing it is high noon. This delays the onset of sleep and fragments the architecture of the sleep cycles, reducing the amount of time spent in the critical, deep restorative phases. We are effectively living in a state of permanent circadian jet lag, out of sync with our own biology. Furthermore, the long-term cardiovascular implications of sleep debt are directly linked to erectile dysfunction. During deep sleep, the heart rate slows and blood pressure drops, giving the cardiovascular system a necessary respite. Chronic sleep deprivation keeps the cardiovascular system under constant pressure, leading to hypertension and endothelial dysfunction. As established in the analysis of smoking, the endothelium is the gatekeeper of the erection. If the blood vessels are stressed and inflamed from a lack of nightly recovery, they lose their elasticity and their ability to produce nitric oxide. Thus, the sleep-deprived man is attacking his performance from 3 angles simultaneously. He is hormonally depleted, low T, neurologically dulled, brain fog, and vascularly constricted, hypertension. It is critical to understand that sleep debt cannot be paid back on the weekends. The biological damage of 5 consecutive nights of poor sleep is cumulative and immediate. The belief that one can function optimally on 4 or 5 hours of sleep is a delusion of grandeur.
Often fueled by stimulants like caffeine, which further mask the underlying exhaustion without fixing the cellular deficit.
Caffeine has a half-life of roughly 6 hours. Consuming it in the afternoon ensures that it is still blocking adenosine receptors in the brain at midnight, preventing the onset of deep sleep. This reliance on chemical energy to override the need for biological recovery is a losing strategy. The most successful, high-performing men in history, from athletes to world leaders, have often been rigorous guardians of their sleep, recognizing it as the foundation upon which all other performance is built. To ignore sleep is to build a skyscraper on a foundation of sand. Eventually, the structure will collapse, and for the modern male, that collapse manifests as a total failure of performance in the bedroom and the boardroom.
4. The digital dopamine trap, the erosion of virility through pornography and masturbation overuse. We are currently witnessing a sociological and biological experiment of unprecedented scale, the unlimited high-speed access to hardcore sexual imagery for the male brain. For millions of years, the male sexual drive was an evolutionary scarcity mechanism. Access to a mate required effort, status, competition, and social calibration. The reward for this effort was dopamine, the neurotransmitter of desire and motivation. Today, that evolutionary circuit has been hijacked. Pornography acts as a supernormal stimulus, a term coined by ethologist Nico Tinbergen to describe artificial triggers that are more effective than the natural equivalent. Just as a bird will ignore its own eggs to sit on a giant, brightly painted plaster egg, the modern male brain is being rewired to prefer the pixelated hyperreality of pornography over the nuanced, slower-paced reality of human intimacy. This is not a moral crisis, it is a neurological emergency that is destroying male performance through a phenomenon known as porn-induced erectile dysfunction, PIED. To understand PIED, one must look at the neurochemistry of addiction. When a man watches pornography, his brain is flooded with dopamine at levels that far exceed what is possible in a natural encounter. The internet offers an infinite novelty, new faces, new acts, new fetishes, available with the click of a mouse. This triggers the Coolidge effect, a biological phenomenon where a male exhibits renewed sexual interest whenever a new female is introduced. In the wild, this mechanism ensured genetic diversity. On the internet, it creates a dopamine feedback loop of endless searching and clicking. The brain, overwhelmed by this chemical flood, attempts to maintain homeostasis by downregulating its dopamine receptors. It essentially numbs itself. Over time, the man requires more extreme, more shocking, and more novel stimuli just to feel a baseline level of arousal. This is the process of desensitization. When this man then attempts to be with a real partner, the stimulation is simply not loud enough. A real woman does not change into a different person every 10 seconds. She does not perform in 4K resolution with exaggerated lighting and editing. The brain, adapted to the superstimulus, fails to signal the erection because the real-world input doesn't meet the artificially inflated threshold for arousal.
This desensitization is compounded by the physical trauma of death-grip masturbation. In the privacy of solitary indulgence, men often condition themselves to a specific type of pressure, speed, and friction that is anatomically impossible for a partner to replicate. The human hand can apply a tightness and velocity that a vagina or mouth cannot. Over years of habitual overuse, the nerve endings in the penis become acclimated to this specific high-intensity sensation. This creates a physical disconnect during intercourse. The man is essentially training his body to respond only to his own hand. He may find himself unable to ejaculate with a partner, delayed ejaculation, or losing his erection mid-act because the physical sensation falls below the threshold his nerves have been conditioned to expect. This transforms sex from a shared act of intimacy into a frustrating, labor-intensive friction exercise, where the man is desperately trying to chase a sensation he can only give himself. The psychological ramifications of this habit are equally destructive. Pornography consumption creates a script in the male mind that is divorced from reality. It teaches that sex is performative, visual, and centering entirely on the male's immediate gratification, often devoid of emotional connection or foreplay. When real intimacy occurs, the anxiety of performance sets in. The man becomes a spectator in his own bedroom, monitoring his own erection rather than experiencing the moment. This spectatoring is the death knell of performance. The moment a man starts worrying about whether he will stay hard, the sympathetic nervous system activates, adrenaline floods the bloodstream, and the erection, which requires relaxation, is killed instantly. Pornography creates the expectation of a machine-like performance, and when biology fails to meet that digital standard, the resulting shame drives the man back to the safety of the screen, reinforcing the addiction cycle. Furthermore, the content of modern pornography has escalated into realms of violence, degradation, and taboo that warp the user's perception of sexuality. As the vanilla dopamine hits stop working, users drift toward more extreme genres. This can lead to a profound cognitive dissonance, where a man loves and respects his partner, but can only be sexually aroused by scenarios that are degrading or violent. This Madonna whore complex splits the psyche, making it difficult to integrate love and lust.
He cannot perform with the woman he loves because his arousal is wired to things he subconsciously finds shameful or detached. This erodes the emotional bond of relationships, leading to a sterile, sexless coexistence that often ends in separation. The partner, unaware of the internal neurowiring issues, often internalizes the lack of intimacy as a rejection of her attractiveness, creating a tragic dynamic of mutual insecurity.
The societal impact of this digital castration is visible in the growing number of young men withdrawing entirely from the dating market. We are seeing a generation of incels and men who have simply opted out of courtship because the digital alternative is easier, cheaper, and risk-free. Why face the potential rejection, financial cost, and emotional complexity of dating when a harem of the world's most attractive performers is available for free in 4K? This apathy is the ultimate surrender of male biological imperative. It is a retreat from life itself. The energy that men historically channeled into building civilizations, creating art, and protecting families, energy driven by the sublimated sex drive, is now being dissipated into a tissue. The transmutation of sexual energy, a concept touted by Napoleon Hill and other thinkers, posits that sexual desire is the most powerful creative force in humans. By squandering this energy daily on pixels, men are draining their batteries, leaving them listless, unmotivated, and docile in the real world. The future of this trend is even more dystopian with the advent of virtual reality and artificial intelligence. VR pornography offers an immersive experience that hacks the brain's mirror neurons, making the user feel as though they are physically present in the scene. AI companions offer emotional validation without the demands of a real relationship. As these technologies converge, the barrier between reality and fantasy will dissolve completely. We risk a future where a significant percentage of the male population is functionally asexual in the real world, fully satisfied by digital simulacra. This is not just a performance issue, it is an existential threat to the propagation of the species and the social fabric of society. Recovery from this state, however, is possible due to neuroplasticity. The brain is malleable. By ceasing the consumption of pornography and masturbation, often referred to as a reboot, the brain's reward pathways can heal.
Dopamine receptors upregulate, sensitivity returns, and the appreciation for normal stimuli is restored. This process is often grueling, accompanied by a flatline period where libido seems to disappear entirely before rebuilding. But for the man seeking to reclaim his power, it is an essential detox. The ability to look a real woman in the eyes and feel a surge of genuine, grounded desire is a superpower in the modern age. It requires breaking the chains of the digital harem and accepting that the easy dopamine of the screen is a lie that costs you your manhood. To quit immediately is to step out of the matrix of artificial gratification and back into the arena of real life, where true performance and true satisfaction is found.
5. The chair as a coffin, the hemodynamic collapse of the sedentary lifestyle. In the grand timeline of human evolution, the chair is a relatively recent invention, and biologically speaking, it is a torture device. For 2 million years, the male physiology was honed by the rigors of persistence hunting, nomadic migration, and physical labor. The male body is designed to be a kinetic engine. It thrives on movement, load-bearing, and the rhythmic pumping of the cardiovascular system. Yet in the span of a single century, we have transitioned from a species of movers to a species of sitters. The modern male now spends the vast majority of his waking life commuting, working, eating, and relaxing locked in a seated position. This is not merely a matter of laziness, it is a fundamental mismatch between our evolutionary biology and our modern environment. The consequences of this mismatch are devastating, manifesting as a slow-motion collapse of the vascular and metabolic systems that underpin male performance. To sit for 8 to 12 hours a day is to voluntarily place one's virility in a state of suspended animation, slowly suffocating the mechanisms of arousal and stamina. The primary casualty of the sedentary lifestyle is hemodynamic competence. An erection is, at its core, a hydraulic event dependent on the rapid, unimpeded flow of blood. This flow is regulated by the endothelium, the inner lining of the blood vessels. The health of the endothelium is maintained by shear stress, the friction caused by blood rushing through the arteries. When a man moves, walks, or runs, his heart rate rises, blood velocity increases, and this friction signals the endothelium to produce nitric oxide, the molecule responsible for keeping arteries flexible and dilated. When a man sits for hours on end, the shear stress drops to near zero. The blood flow becomes sluggish and laminar. Without the mechanical signal of movement, nitric oxide production plummets. The arteries begin to stiffen and constrict. This is the vascular equivalent of a river turning into a swamp. The stagnation allows for the accumulation of inflammatory markers and the acceleration of atherosclerotic plaque. By the time the sedentary man attempts to engage in sexual activity, his vascular system is cold, rigid, and unresponsive, unable to accommodate the sudden demand for blood flow required for a robust erection. Beyond the systemic vascular slowdown,
We must address the specific anatomical trauma inflicted on the pelvic region. When a man sits, particularly in the ergonomically disastrous postures common in modern offices and vehicles, he is placing the entirety of his upper body weight directly onto his perineum, the area between the scrotum and the anus. This region is a critical junction for the nerves and arteries that supply the penis. Specifically, the internal pudental artery and the pudental nerve are subjected to chronic compression. This is akin to stepping on a garden hose. The flow
flow is mechanically restricted. Over years of chronic sitting, this compression can lead to a condition known as pudendal nerve entrapment or pudendal neuralgia. The symptoms include numbness, pain, and a profound disconnection between the brain's arousal signals and the genital response. The nerves simply stop firing efficiently. We are seeing a rise in cases where men have normal hormone levels but suffer from ED simply because the wiring has been damaged by decades of crushing their own pelvic floor against an office chair. The metabolic consequences of a sedentary existence are equally catastrophic for testosterone production. Muscle tissue is not just for locomotion, it is the body's largest endocrine organ. When muscles are active, they release signaling molecules and burn glucose and triglycerides from the bloodstream. When a man sits, the electrical activity in his leg muscles, the largest muscle group in the body, drops to zero. This triggers a cascade of metabolic shutdowns. The production of lipoprotein lipase, an enzyme that breaks down fat in the blood, is suppressed by nearly 90%. This leads to high triglycerides and low HDL, good cholesterol. More importantly, the unused glucose in the bloodstream triggers a chronic release of insulin. High insulin levels are a direct antagonist to testosterone. The body shifts into storage mode, depositing energy as visceral fat, the hard, dangerous fat that wraps around the organs in the abdomen. Visceral fat is the enemy of masculinity. It is metabolically active tissue that functions like a parasite. It produces inflammatory cytokines that attack blood vessels, but its most damning role is its high concentration of aromatase. Aromatase is the enzyme that converts testosterone into estradiol, estrogen. The sedentary man is essentially building a chemical factory in his gut that actively steals his male hormones and replaces them with female hormones.
This leads to the skinny fat physique common in the modern white-collar workforce, thin arms and legs due to muscle atrophy combined with a protruding belly. This physique is a visible marker of hormonal inversion. The more he sits, the more belly fat he gains. The more belly fat he gains, the lower his testosterone drops. The lower his testosterone, the less energy he has to move. It is a self-reinforcing downward spiral that ends in metabolic syndrome and total loss of libido. We must also consider the structural impact on the hip flexors and the pelvic tilt. Chronic sit-in causes the iliopsoas muscles, hip flexors, to shorten and tighten. This pulls the pelvis into an anterior tilt, creating a duck butt posture and lower back pain. But structurally, this tightness restricts blood flow to the groin, even when the man stands up. The tight fascia and muscles act as a permanent tourniquet around the femoral and pudendal vessels. Furthermore, the gluteal muscles, the powerhouse of the male physique, atrophy from disuse and constant compression. This phenomenon, colloquially known as gluteal amnesia, means the glutes forget how to fire. In the context of sexual performance, the glutes and hips are the primary drivers of thrusting power and stamina. A man with weak, atrophied glutes and tight hip flexors lacks the mechanical endurance for vigorous intercourse, leading to fatigue and a reliance on passive positioning that diminishes the experience for both partners. The cultural shift towards a convenience economy has exacerbated this issue to a critical breaking point. We order food from apps to avoid walking to a restaurant. We use electric scooters to avoid walking to the bus. We use Zoom to avoid walking to a meeting room. Every technological advancement in the last 2 decades has been aimed at eliminating physical exertion. We are engineering movement out of our lives. The rise of the gaming chair as a coveted piece of furniture for young men is symbolic of this decline. These chairs are designed to make hours of immobility comfortable, effectively enabling the degradation of the user's physiology. The comfort crisis suggests that by removing the physical stressors of movement, we have made ourselves fragile. The male body requires the stress of gravity and exertion to maintain its structural and hormonal integrity. Without it, it withers. The psychological impact of a sedentary lifestyle also feeds into performance anxiety.
The human brain evolved to associate movement with agency and survival. Immobility is biologically associated with illness, hiding, or dying. A sedentary life breeds a sedentary mind, prone to depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. The runner's high is a real neurochemical event. Movement releases endorphins and dopamine that regulate mood and confidence. A man who sits all day is deprived of these natural antidepressants. He returns home mentally exhausted, but physically restless, a state of tired and wired that kills the relaxed focus required for intimacy. He feels disconnected from his body because he inhabits it only as a passenger, not a driver. To reverse this, the solution is not merely exercise for 1 hour a day, but a fundamental restructuring of one's relationship with gravity. The concept of non-exercise activity thermogenesis, NEAT, becomes critical. Standing desks, walking meetings, and the conscious decision to move every 30 minutes are not productivity hacks. They are vascular survival strategies. Breaking the cycle of stagnation restores the shear stress on the arteries, wakes up the dormant nerves in the pelvis, and reactivates the lipid-burning enzymes in the muscles. The man who refuses to sit is the man who preserves his potency. In a world conspiring to keep you in a chair, standing up is a revolutionary act of reclaiming your biological power.
6. The edible poison, how sugar and processed food are chemically castrating the modern male. If the sedentary lifestyle is the cage, then the modern industrial diet is the gas pumped into the chamber.
We are living through a nutritional apocalypse where food has been replaced by edible food-like substances engineered for addiction, shelf stability, and profit with zero regard for human physiology. The standard American diet, SAD, high in processed sugars, refined grains, and industrial seed oils, is the single greatest environmental driver of the collapse in male testosterone levels and reproductive health. This is not about aesthetics or having a six-pack. It is about the systemic poisoning of the blood, the nerves, and the endocrine system. When a man consumes a diet high in sugar and fast food, he is voluntarily ingesting agents that destroy the very machinery of his manhood. The assault begins with insulin resistance, the harbinger of all metabolic disease. When a man consumes a meal high in refined sugar or simple carbohydrates, like a burger bun, fries, and a soda, his blood glucose spikes to dangerous levels. The pancreas responds by flooding the system with insulin to shuttle that sugar into cells. However, when this happens 3, 4, or 5 times a day, every day, the cells eventually stop responding. They lock their doors. This is insulin resistance. The result is that insulin levels remain chronically high in the bloodstream. Insulin is a foundational hormone that, when elevated, wreaks havoc on other hormonal systems. Specifically, high insulin creates a state of chronic inflammation that damages the endothelial lining of the blood vessels. As we have established, a damaged endothelium cannot produce nitric oxide. Therefore, a diet high in sugar is a direct pathway to vascular erectile dysfunction. The blood vessels become inflamed, thickened, and unable to dilate. The sugar rush is literally rusting your pipes. Beyond the vascular damage, we must examine the phenomenon of advanced glycation end products, AGEs. When excess sugar circulates in the blood, it binds to proteins and fats in a process called glycation. These new sticky molecules are AGEs. They lodge themselves in the tissues of the body, causing them to stiffen and age prematurely. In the context of the penis, which relies on the elasticity of the tunica albuginea and the spongy tissue to trap blood for an erection, glycation is disastrous.
It turns elastic tissue into rigid scar tissue. The penis loses its ability to expand fully, leading to softer erections and potentially penile shrinkage over time. The man who lives on fast food is caramelizing his own internal organs, turning supple biological tissue into brittle, non-functional matter. The fast food industry also introduces a potent enemy: industrial seed oils, soybean, corn, canola, sunflower. These oils are highly unstable and rich in omega-6 fatty acids, which are pro-inflammatory. When heated and reheated in deep fryers, the standard practice for fries and chicken nuggets, they oxidize into toxic byproducts like aldehydes. Consuming these oxidized oils triggers systemic inflammation that affects every cell membrane in the body, including the Leydig cells in the testes responsible for testosterone production. Inflammation serves as a signal to the body that it is under attack, causing it to deprioritize reproduction. Why would the body waste energy on libido and sperm production when it is fighting a fire on the cellular level? The consumption of these oils correlates directly with the plummeting sperm counts observed globally, a fertility crisis that threatens the future of the species. Furthermore, we must discuss the endocrine disruptors hidden in fast food and its packaging. Fast food is often wrapped in materials treated with PFAS, per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, to make them grease-resistant. These forever chemicals, along with the phthalates found in plastic processing equipment and the pesticide residues in non-organic mass-produced ingredients, are xenoestrogens. They mimic estrogen in the male body. They bind to estrogen receptors and block testosterone receptors. A man eating a fast food meal is not just eating calories, he is eating a cocktail of chemicals that actively feminize his hormonal profile. Studies have shown that men with higher levels of phthalates in their system have significantly lower testosterone and reduced sperm quality. The convenience of the drive-thru comes with a hidden side of chemical castration. The immediate acute effect of a high-sugar meal on testosterone is also profound. Research indicates that after consuming a high sugar load, a man's testosterone levels can drop by up to 25% almost immediately and remain suppressed for hours. This is the postprandial testosterone dip. If a man eats a sugary breakfast, a fast food lunch, and a pasta dinner,
he is keeping his testosterone suppressed for the entire waking day. He is operating in a hormonal valley of his own making. This lack of testosterone manifests as lethargy, brain fog, and a complete absence of the aggressive, competitive drive that characterizes the masculine prime. We must also address the neurochemistry of this diet. Sugar and processed fats are engineered to hit the bliss point, a specific sensory profile that triggers the brain's dopamine reward system in a way that mimics cocaine or opioids. This creates a powerful addiction loop. The man feels stressed or tired, often from the crash of the previous sugar high, so he craves the immediate relief of junk food. He eats it, gets a dopamine spike, and feels a fleeting sense of comfort, but this is followed by a crash, increased inflammation, and guilt, driving him back to the food for relief. This addiction rewires the brain's reward pathways, making natural pleasures like healthy food, exercise, or real intimacy seem less appealing by comparison. The food coma is a state of sedation where libido goes to die. The link between obesity and performance is undeniable, and diet is the primary driver of obesity. As mentioned in the sedentary section, adipose tissue, fat, converts testosterone to estrogen, but the diet drives this process with ruthless efficiency. High fructose corn syrup, HFCS, a staple in sodas and sauces, is metabolized almost exclusively by the liver, where it triggers lipogenesis, fat creation, more aggressively than any other sugar.
This leads to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFDS. A compromised liver cannot effectively regulate sex hormone-binding globulin, SHBG, or clear excess estrogen from the blood. The liver is the filter of the male hormonal system. Clogging it with fructose is akin to clogging the oil filter of a high-performance car. The engine will eventually seize. Culturally, the normalization of this diet is a tragedy. We are surrounded by food deserts where fresh meat and vegetables are scarce, but processed sludge is available at every gas station and checkout counter. The marketing of these foods often targets men specifically, associating burgers and energy drinks with extreme sports or gaming, while concealing the biological reality that these products are the antithesis of performance. The dad bod is often laughed off as a consequence of aging or marriage, but in reality it is a symptom of nutritional toxicity.
It is the physical manifestation of a body struggling under the weight of insulin resistance and estrogen dominance. To reclaim performance, one must view food not as entertainment, but as fuel and information. Every bite sends a signal to the DNA. A steak sends a signal of protein synthesis and repair. A donut sends a signal of inflammation and storage. The transition to a diet based on whole, single-ingredient foods, meats, eggs, vegetables, healthy fats, is the most powerful biohack available. It clears the inflammation, restores insulin sensitivity, heals the endothelium, and unblocks the testosterone pathways. The clarity of mind and the surge in libido that follows the elimination of sugar and seed oils is often described as waking up. To continue eating the standard American diet is to accept a standard of performance that is suboptimal, diseased, and ultimately impotent. The quit immediate directive here is a call to stop fueling your own destruction.
7. The invisible castrator, the biochemical tyranny of chronic stress and overthinking. In the modern theater of male existence, there is no predator more insidious, more pervasive, and more lethal to virility than chronic stress. Unlike the external threats of our ancestors, the saber-toothed cat or the rival tribesman, today's enemy is internal, invisible, and incessant. It is the buzzing smartphone, the relentless deadline, the financial anxiety, and the paralyzing overanalysis of social dynamics. While we culturally dismiss stress as a mere emotional state or a badge of honor in the hustle economy, biologically, it is a weapon of mass destruction deployed against the male endocrine system. To understand why stress kills performance, we must strip away the psychological euphemisms and examine the brutal efficiency of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA axis. This system is the body's alarm bell, designed to prioritize survival above all else. When a man lives in a state of chronic stress, he's essentially locking his body in a permanent emergency mode, where reproduction, libido, and erectile function are deemed biologically expensive luxuries that must be jettisoned to save fuel for survival. The fundamental mechanism at play here is often referred to as the pregnenolone steal, though modern endocrinology views it through a more complex lens of substrate competition and receptor downregulation. Pregnenolone is the mother hormone, the raw cholesterol-based precursor from which all steroid hormones are derived. In a healthy, balanced male, pregnenolone converts into DHEA, which then converts into testosterone. However, pregnenolone is also the precursor to cortisol, the primary stress hormone. When the brain perceives a threat, whether it is a physical danger or a looming divorce, it signals the adrenal glands to churn out cortisol to mobilize energy. The body, in its evolutionary wisdom, prioritizes the immediate survival hormone, cortisol, over the long-term reproductive hormone, testosterone. Consequently, the raw materials intended for building male vitality are hijacked to build the chemistry of Canik. The stressed man is literally transmuting his potential manhood into anxiety. He is chemically robbing his future virility to pay for his present fear. This hormonal antagonism is absolute. Cortisol and testosterone function like weights on a seesaw. When one goes up, the other must come down.
High levels of cortisol actively block the production of gonadotrope and releasing hormone in the hypothalamus and luteinizing hormone in the pituitary gland. Without the LH signal, the Leydig cells in the testes go dormant. Furthermore, cortisol renders the body's tissues resistant to whatever testosterone is remaining. It creates a catabolic state, a metabolic fire that breaks down muscle tissue for quick energy. Since muscle mass is a primary driver of testosterone production, stress creates a self-reinforcing downward spiral. Stress burns muscle. Less muscle means less testosterone. Less testosterone lowers stress resilience, leading to more stress. This is the biological definition of burnout. The man feels tired but wired, his body vibrating with adrenaline yet exhausted to the core, his libido utterly extinguished because his biology believes he is running a marathon for his life 24 hours a day. We must also analyze the devastating impact of the sympathetic nervous system overdrive on the mechanics of the erection. The autonomic nervous system has two branches, the sympathetic, fight or flight, and the parasympathetic, rest and digest. An erection is legally the property of the parasympathetic nervous system. It requires a state of physiological relaxation to allow the smooth muscles of the penile arteries to unwind and fill with blood. Stress activates the sympathetic nervous system, which floods the body with epinephrine, adrenaline. Adrenaline is a potent vasoconstrictor. Its job is to shunt blood away from the extremities and the digestive and reproductive organs and force it into the heart, lungs, and skeletal muscles for combat. If a man is chronically stressed, his sympathetic tone is permanently elevated. His blood vessels are clamped shut. Physiologically, it is impossible to maintain an erection when the body is flooded with adrenaline. Trying to perform sexually when stressed is like trying to park a car while driving 100 miles per hour on the highway. The gears simply will not engage. The overthinking component of this entry introduces a neurological dimension known as psychogenic erectile dysfunction. In the pre-internet era, sexual performance was largely instinctual. Today, men are inundated with data, comparison, and the pressure to perform like the edited machines they see in pornography. This leads to spectatoring, a term coined by sex researchers Masters and Johnson.
Instead of being fully immersed in the sensory experience of intimacy, the overthinking male detaches from his body and becomes a third-party observer of his own performance. He monitors his erection, analyzes his partner's microexpressions, and calculates his timing. This cerebral hyperactivity acts as a cortical brake on the spinal reflexes that control sex. The prefrontal cortex, the analytical, worrying part of the brain, must effectively shut down for a man to reach a state of flow and climax. When a man overthinks, he keeps the prefrontal cortex lit up like a Christmas tree, sending inhibitory signals down the spinal cord that kill arousal instantly. The anxiety about losing the erection becomes the very cause of losing it, creating a feedback loop of failure and shame that can persist for years. The historical context of the stress crisis is rooted in an evolutionary mismatch. For 99% of human history, stress was acute and physical. You ran from a predator for 5 minutes, you either escaped or you died. If you escaped, the stress hormones dissipated and you returned to baseline. Today, stress is chronic and psychological. The predator is the email inbox that never empties, the mortgage that lasts 30 years, the social media feed designed to make you feel inadequate. The body does not distinguish between a lion and a lawsuit. It dumps the same cortisol. But because we never physically run or fight to burn off this chemistry, the hormones marinate in our blood, slowly corroding our vascular and neural integrity. This is allostatic load, the wear and tear on the body which accumulates as an individual is exposed to repeated or chronic stress. The modern male is carrying an allostatic load that would crush a prehistoric hunter, not in weight but in duration. Furthermore, chronic stress disrupts the gut-brain axis, leading to systemic inflammation. Stress alters the microbiome, increasing intestinal permeability, leaky gut. This allows bacterial endotoxins to enter the bloodstream, triggering an immune response that further suppresses testosterone. The body will not prioritize reproduction when it is fighting a systemic infection, real or perceived. This inflammation also affects the brain, reducing dopamine production. Dopamine is the driver of libido and motivation. A stressed brain is a dopamine-depleted brain. This manifests as anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure.
The stressed man doesn't just lose his erection, he loses his appetite for life, for women, for conquest. He becomes a gray, hollowed-out version of himself, functioning on autopilot, capable of labor but incapable of passion. The cultural toxicity surrounding hustle culture exacerbates this. Men are taught that sleep deprivation, high stress, and constant anxiety are the prices of success. They are encouraged to grind until they break. This narrative fails to account for the biological cost. A man who destroys his endocrine system to build a fortune arrives at the finish line impotent, lethargic, and physically broken. The true definition of high performance must include biological resilience. The most elite operators, military special forces, Olympic athletes, are masters of stress regulation. They understand that the ability to switch off the sympathetic nervous system is just as critical as the ability to turn it on. They prioritize parasympathetic recovery through breathwork, meditation, and detachment, not as woo-woo spiritual practices, but as hard-nosed physiological necessities to keep their testosterone high and their reflexes sharp. To quit the habit of chronic stress is not to quit one's job or abandon responsibility. It is to fundamentally change the physiological response to demand. It requires the implementation of compartmentalization, the ability to mentally seal off stressors so they do not bleed into the sanctuary of rest and intimacy. It involves the physical metabolism of stress hormones through intense activity, which we will cover next, and the disciplined refusal to engage in circular, anxious thinking. The man who masters his stress response reclaims his biology. He lowers his cortisol, unlocks his testosterone, and opens the vascular floodgates. He moves from a state of frantic survival to a state of calm, potent dominance. In a world of neurotic, cortisol-soaked men, the calm, regulated male is the apex predator.
8. The sarcopenic death, the hormonal collapse of not exercising and ignoring strength training. If stress is the active poison, then the absence of strength training is the passive rot. There is a pervasive misconception in the modern world that exercise is merely a tool for weight management or vanity, something you do to burn calories or look good on the beach. This view is dangerously incomplete.
Biologically, skeletal muscle is not just contractile tissue used to move heavy objects, it is the body's largest endocrine organ. It is a metabolic engine that communicates directly with the testes, the brain, and the bones. When a man refuses to lift heavy weights, he is not just out of shape, he is silencing the primary biological signal that tells his body he is a man. The habit of not exercising, specifically the avoidance of resistance training, leads to a condition of sarcopenic obesity and hormonal obsolescence that renders male performance impossible. To understand the magnitude of this failure, we must look at the concept of myokines. When muscle fibers contract against heavy resistance, they secrete signaling proteins called myokines, specifically interleukin-6, irisin, and others, into the bloodstream. These chemical messengers travel throughout the body, reducing systemic inflammation, improving insulin sensitivity, and protecting the brain from neurodegeneration. Most critically, the mechanical stress of heavy lifting sends a shockwave through the central nervous system, CNS, that triggers the release of anabolic hormones. The body interprets the struggle against gravity as a survival necessity. It responds by upregulating the production of testosterone and growth hormone GH to repair and reinforce the tissue. By skipping strength training, a man deprives himself of this natural anabolic cycle. He is voluntarily shutting down his own internal pharmacy. The absence of muscle mass leads to a catastrophic metabolic shift. Muscle is the primary sink for glucose disposal. It stores glycogen. When a man has low muscle mass, the carbohydrates he eats have nowhere to go. They linger in the bloodstream, raising blood sugar and insulin levels. As we have established in previous entries, high insulin is the death knell for testosterone. This leads to the skinny fat physique, a man who may not look morbidly obese in clothes, but possesses high levels of visceral fat and low levels of muscle. This visceral fat is an estrogen factory.
The sedentary, under-muscled man is trapped in a feedback loop. His lack of muscle causes insulin resistance, which lowers testosterone and increases estrogen, which makes it harder to build muscle and easier to gain fat. He is chemically transitioning into a softer, more fragile organism. We must also address the vascular implications of muscle weakness. The heart pumps blood, but the skeletal muscles act as the second heart, particularly the muscles of the legs and hips. The rhythmic contraction of strong muscles aids in venous return, pushing deoxygenated blood back to the heart and ensuring efficient circulation. A man with atrophied legs and glutes has poor systemic circulation. The stagnation affects the delicate capillary networks of the penis. Furthermore, resistance training is the most effective way to increase the production of endothelial progenitor cells, EPCs, stem cells that repair the inner lining of blood vessels. A man who lifts weights is constantly renewing his vascular system, keeping the pipes clean and elastic. The man who does not lift allows his vessels to stiffen and age. The connection between strength and the nervous system is equally profound, and erection is a neuromuscular event. It requires a strong signal from the brain to the pelvic floor. Strength training, particularly compound movements like squats and deadlifts, trains the CNS to fire efficiently. It improves neural drive. A man who can deadlift twice his body weight has a nervous system that is highly conductive, capable of recruiting muscle fibers and transmitting signals with explosive power. A man who has never stressed his CNS with heavy loads has a dim nervous system. His neural signals are weak and slow. This translates directly to the bedroom, where the intensity of physical sensation and the strength of the ejaculatory reflex are diminished by a sluggish nervous system. Historically, the decline of male strength is a modern anomaly. For millennia, survival was predicated on physical capability. A man who could not carry a load, build a shelter, or drag a kill was a dead man. Evolution bred us to respond to physical demand. The thrifty gene hypothesis suggests that in the absence of physical demand, the body aggressively conserves energy by shutting down non-essential functions. If you are sitting on a couch all day, your body perceives no need for high testosterone, dense bones, or heavy muscle. It downregulates these systems to save calories.
You are signaling to your genome that you are a retiree, regardless of your actual age. By not lifting, you are telling your DNA that the war is over, the hunt is done, and it is time to wither away. We must also confront the psychological dimension of the iron. There is a mental fortitude that is forged only under the crushing weight of a barbell, the discipline required to push through physical discomfort, the patience to build strength over years, and the objective reality of the numbers. 200 pounds is 200 pounds, it cannot be argued with, creates a grounded, stoic masculinity. This is somatopsychic resilience, the body teaching the mind. A man who avoids this struggle often lacks the grit required to handle emotional or relational pressure. He feels fragile because he is fragile. This lack of physical confidence bleeds into sexual confidence. A man who feels small and weak in the world will feel small and weak in the bedroom. The sensation of possessing a capable, dangerous body is a primal aphrodisiac. It changes how a man walks, how he breathes, and how he engages with a partner. It is crucial to distinguish between exercise and training. Cardio, while beneficial for the heart, is not sufficient to stop the decline of male performance. In fact, excessive chronic cardio without strength training can actually lower testosterone by increasing cortisol, the marathon runner phenotype. The requirement here is resistance. The body must fight against gravity.
The bone-muscle crosstalk is a newly discovered phenomenon where bones, under the stress of heavy lifting, release a hormone called osteocalcin. Osteocalcin acts directly on the Leydig cells of the testes to increase testosterone production. Therefore, weak bones lead to weak hormones. The man who avoids the squat rack is denying his testes the molecular signal they need to function. The cultural trajectory is alarming. We are seeing a generation of men with the grip strength of an 85-year-old woman from the 1980s. Sarcopenia, muscle loss, is starting in the 30s rather than the 60s. This physical frailty is correlated with all-cause mortality, depression, and erectile dysfunction. The gym is not a vanity project. It is the modern equivalent of the hunt. It is the only place where we can simulate the evolutionary pressures that built us. To reject strength training is to reject the biological inheritance of your ancestors.
To quit the habit of not exercising means to embrace the identity of an athlete regardless of profession. It means understanding that muscle is the armor that protects the man from the world. It buffers stress, devours sugar, generates hormones, and signals vitality to every potential mate. The quit immediately directive here is a mandate to get under the bar. The first rep of a heavy squat is the first step away from the grave. It is the reclamation of the metabolic fire that defines the masculine prime. Without it, you are merely a ghost in a decaying shell, watching your performance fade into history.
There exists a peculiar and deadly form of arrogance within the male psyche, a stoic refusal to acknowledge physical vulnerability until the catastrophic failure of the biological machine occurs. This phenomenon, often culturally codified as toughing it out, is the ninth and perhaps most tragic habit on this list. It is the habit of willful ignorance. Men treat their bodies like rental cars they intend to return with the tank empty and the engine smoking, ignoring the flashing warning lights on the dashboard for decades. In the context of male performance, this negligence is fatal. The penis is not an isolated organ. It is a barometer for the systemic health of the body. It is the canary in the coal mine. Because the penile arteries are significantly smaller than the coronary arteries, 1 to 2 millimeters versus 3 to 4 millimeters, vascular disease manifests in the bedroom years before it manifests in the heart. When a man ignores conditions like hypertension, high blood pressure, and diabetes, he is not merely risking his long-term longevity, he is actively dismantling the microvascular and neurological infrastructure required for erection. Let us first bisect the silent killer, hypertension. High blood pressure is often dismissed by men as a minor issue, a simple number on a chart that can be ignored if one feels fine. This is a dangerous delusion. Hypertension is a mechanical assault on the endothelium. Imagine a garden hose designed for a specific water pressure. If you crank the pressure up to double its capacity and leave it there for 10 years, the inner lining of the hose will begin to fray, crack, and burst. The body repairs these micro tears in the arterial walls with scar tissue and plaque, a process known as atherosclerosis. This scarring hardens the arteries, stripping them of their elasticity. An erection requires the rapid, massive expansion of the penile arteries. If those arteries have been turned into rigid, calcified pipes due to years of untreated high pressure, they physically cannot dilate. The hydraulic mechanism fails. Furthermore, the medication often prescribed for hypertension, beta blockers and diuretics, can historically have side effects that dampen libido and performance, leading men to abandon treatment entirely. This creates a lethal catch-22. The disease destroys the erection, and the fear of the cure causes men to let the disease run rampant. However,
modern medicine offers alternatives that protect the vasculature without sacrificing performance. The tragedy lies in the man who refuses to engage with his doctor to find these solutions, preferring to live in denial while his vascular system slowly turns to stone. The correlation is stark. A man with erectile dysfunction in his 40s has a significantly higher risk of suffering a major cardiac event in his 50s. By ignoring the softness downstairs, he is ignoring the imminent heart attack upstairs. The refusal to treat blood pressure is a refusal to maintain the hydraulic integrity of the entire body. The second horseman of this apocalypse is type 2 diabetes, a disease that is reaching epidemic proportions due to the dietary habits discussed in entry number 6. While high blood pressure ruins the pipes, diabetes destroys the wiring. High blood glucose is essentially a slow-acting neurotoxin. When sugar levels in the blood remain chronically elevated, the glucose molecules bind to proteins and lipids, forming advanced glycation end products, AGEs. These toxic compounds accumulate in the nerve fibers, causing them to degenerate and die. This is diabetic neuropathy. In the context of sexual function, this is catastrophic. The erection reflex relies on a complex feedback loop of sensory nerves sending signals to the brain and autonomic nerves sending signals back to the penis. Diabetes severs these connection lines. The horror of diabetic neuropathy is its insidious nature. It often begins with a slight loss of sensitivity, a numbness that is easily dismissed. Over time, the numbness spreads. The man may still feel desire, if his hormones aren't also wrecked, but the physical sensation required to maintain arousal and reach climax is gone. He is touching, but he cannot feel.
Once a nerve has died, it is notoriously difficult, often impossible, to resurrect. The diabetic man who ignores his blood sugar is voluntarily undergoing a slow-motion sensory deprivation experiment. Additionally, hyperglycemia directly attacks the smooth muscle cells of the penis, preventing them from relaxing. Even with the help of drugs like Viagra, which rely on intact nerves and nitric oxide pathways to work, a diabetic man may eventually reach a point of no return, where the tissue is simply too damaged to respond to any chemical intervention. We must also address the broader metabolic syndrome, a cluster of
excess body fat around the waist and abnormal cholesterol levels. This syndrome creates a systemic state of inflammation. Inflammation is the body's immune response to injury, but when it is chronic, it becomes destructive. Inflammatory cytokines circulate in the blood, attacking the testosterone-producing Leydig cells and the endothelial lining. The man who ignores his expanding waistline and his creeping cholesterol is allowing his body to remain in a state of biological civil war. Resources that should be allocated to reproduction and vitality are diverted to fighting the inflammation caused by his metabolic neglect. The psychological component of this habit is rooted in a fragile definition of masculinity. Many men view going to the doctor as an admission of weakness. They fear the diagnosis more than the disease. They operate under the magical thinking that if I don't know about it, it's not happening. This avoidance behavior is often compounded by the fear of being told to change their lifestyle, to quit drinking, to stop eating steak, to start running. They prefer the comfortable, slow suicide of their current habits to the discomfort of change. This is a failure of leadership over one's own life. A CEO would never ignore a critical failure in his company's infrastructure, yet men routinely ignore the failing infrastructure of their own biology. Moreover, there is the issue of sleep apnea, a condition frequently ignored by men who snore. They view snoring as a nuisance to their partners, not a medical crisis. In reality, obstructive sleep apnea, OSA, involves the repeated cessation of breathing during sleep, leading to severe hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. Every time the breathing stops, the brain panics and spikes cortisol and adrenaline, shocking the heart and preventing deep sleep. This nocturnal suffocation destroys testosterone production, which requires oxygen-rich deep sleep, and places immense strain on the cardiovascular system. Men with untreated sleep apnea have vastly higher rates of ED. The solution, a CPAP machine or weight loss, is often rejected due to vanity or discomfort, condemning the man to a life of hypoxic exhaustion and impotence. The cultural narrative needs to shift from health is for the weak to health is for the elite. The highest performing men in the world view their blood work as a balance sheet. They track their biomarkers with the same rigor they track their stock portfolios.
They understand that you cannot optimize what you do not measure. Ignoring health issues is the ultimate act of self-sabotage. It is the decision to fly blind in a storm. The result is predictable: a premature decline in performance followed by a premature exit from life. The damage caused by years of ignored hypertension or unmanaged diabetes is often cumulative and difficult to reverse. The quit immediately directive here demands a radical confrontation with reality. Book the appointment, take the blood test, accept the diagnosis, and aggressively manage the machine. To do otherwise is to surrender your potency to the slow creep of decay. 10. The emotional castration, staying in toxic relationships or emotional burnout. The final habit in this decalogue of decline is perhaps the most complex because it is external yet deeply internalized. It is the habit of remaining in a toxic relational environment or a state of profound emotional burnout. While we have discussed the biological mechanics of stress, entry number 7, the specific neurochemistry of a toxic relationship deserves its own distinct analysis. The human male is a social animal, and his sexual potency is inextricably linked to his status, his safety, and his emotional validation within his primary partnership. When the sanctuary of the relationship becomes a battlefield, the biological consequences are essentially a form of chemical castration. A man who lives in a state of chronic conflict, resentment, or emotional exhaustion cannot perform, not because his plumbing is broken, but because his software has been corrupted by the environment. To understand this, we must look at the polyvagal theory and the concept of neuroception. The nervous system is constantly scanning the environment for safety or danger. This happens beneath the level of conscious thought. In a healthy relationship, the partner's presence signals safety, triggering the parasympathetic nervous system: rest, digest, and breed. This state is a prerequisite for arousal. In a toxic relationship, characterized by constant criticism, contempt, defensiveness, or stonewalling, the partner's presence becomes a trigger for the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, or the dorsal vagal shutdown, freeze or collapse. When a man walks through the door and immediately braces for an argument or feels the icy wall of resentment, his body floods with cortisol and norepinephrine. As we have established, these survival hormones are potent inhibitors of erections. You cannot be biologically vulnerable, hard, when you are psychologically armored for battle. The specific dynamic of resentment acts as the ultimate anti-aphrodisia. Resentment is the accumulation of unexpressed grievances and unmet needs.
In many toxic dynamics, a pattern emerges where the man feels constantly judged or inadequate, leading to the nice guy syndrome. He suppresses his true needs, avoids conflict to keep the peace, and becomes passive-aggressive. This suppression creates a profound internal dissonance. He loses respect for himself, and inevitably, his partner loses respect for him.
Sexual polarity, the magnetic attraction between masculine and feminine energies, requires respect and tension. It cannot exist in an environment of walking on eggshells. When a man feels emasculated by his partner's words or behaviors during the day, his body will not cooperate with her at night. The penis is often the most honest part of the man. It will not rise for a source of pain. We must also explore the neurobiology of rejection sensitivity. In a relationship where sexual advances are routinely rejected or met with apathy, the male brain begins to associate intimacy with pain. The pain of social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Over time, this creates a conditioned response. The mere thought of initiating sex triggers anxiety and the anticipation of hurt. To protect the ego, the libido shuts down. This is a defense mechanism. The brain decides that wanting is too dangerous, so it stops wanting. This leads to the sexless marriage phenomenon, where two people coexist as roommates, stripped of all erotic charge. The man often internalizes this as a personal failure, further degrading his testosterone and confidence, when in reality it is a protective adaptation to a toxic environment. Emotional burnout is the other side of this coin. This is common in the modern sandwich generation of men, who are simultaneously managing high-pressure careers, raising children, and perhaps caring for aging parents. The modern male is expected to be a provider, a protector, a sensitive listener, and a domestic partner. This role overload leads to a depletion of dopamine. Dopamine is the molecule of pursuit and motivation. When a man is touched out and emotionally drained by the demands of everyone around him, he has no dopamine left for sexual pursuit. He becomes a service robot, efficient, reliable, and completely desexualized. He is giving so much of himself away that there is no energy left to generate the selfish, aggressive spark required for sexual dominance. The Madonna whore complex often resurfaces in and out scenarios. A man may love his partner deeply as the mother of his children and the manager of his household, but he ceases to see her as an erotic object. She becomes mom, a figure of authority and logistics rather than a lover. This desexualization is often mutual. The toxic habit here is the refusal to prioritize the erotic connection over the logistic one.
The couple becomes partners in crime managing a household business, forgetting that the business was founded on a romantic union. Staying in this dynamic without actively working to reignite the polarity is a slow death for the male libido. Furthermore, there is the devastating impact of the narcissistic or borderline dynamic. In relationships with high emotional volatility, the intermittent reinforcement, high highs and low lows, creates a biochemical addiction similar to gambling. The man becomes addicted to trying to stabilize the partner, pouring all his energy into managing her moods. This is exhausting. It creates a hypervigilant state where the man's focus is entirely external. He loses contact with his own body and his own desires. He exists only to serve the emotional chaos of the relationship. In this state, he is not a sovereign man, he is a satellite orbiting a black hole. His performance suffers because he has lost the center of his own masculinity. The cultural stigma around men leaving toxic relationships or admitting to emotional abuse keeps many men trapped. Society often tells men to man up and deal with a difficult partner, or that happy wife, happy life means total capitulation to the partner's emotional state. This is a lie. A man's sexual power is rooted in his emotional sovereignty. He must be able to set boundaries. If those boundaries are repeatedly violated, the environment is toxic to his biology. The quit immediately directive here is the most difficult because it involves the heart and the family structure. However, the biological reality is unforgiving. You cannot bloom in toxic soil. If a relationship is draining your spirit, it is draining your testosterone. The stress of a bad relationship has been shown to lower T levels more effectively than aging. The constant emotional friction keeps the body in a catabolic state. Recovery requires either a radical transformation of the relationship dynamic through therapy, honest communication, and the reestablishment of boundaries, or the courage to leave. The exit is sometimes the only way to save the biological self. Men often report a post-divorce renaissance, where their health markers improve, their testosterone rebounds, and ED vanishes simply because the crushing weight of the toxic dynamic has been lifted. Ultimately, male performance is a holistic phenomenon.
It is not just about blood flow or hormones, it is about the man's position in his world. If he feels respected, safe, and valued, his biology will reflect that with vigor. If he feels trapped, criticized, and drained, his biology will reflect that with impotence. To protect your potency, you must protect your peace. You must curate your inner circle and your intimate life with the same ruthlessness that you curate your diet or your business. To stay in a toxic situation is to agree to your own emasculation. The door is always open. Walking through it may be the hardest thing you ever do, but it is often the only path back to the man you were meant to be. Conclusion: the architecture of a new man. These 10 habits detailed in this dossier represent the systemic dismantling of the modern male. They are interconnected gears in a machine of decline. Smoking constricts the vessels that sugar has inflamed. Alcohol suppresses the testosterone that sleep deprivation has already lowered. Stress consumes the resources that the sedentary body refuses to generate. And a toxic environment crushes the spirit that is too weak to fight back because it hasn't lifted a weight in years. This is a grim picture, but it contains the map to salvation. The reversal of these habits is not merely a health kick, it is a resurrection. By quitting these 10 poisons, you are not just preventing disease, you are unlocking a biological potential that has been suppressed your entire adult life. The human male body is resilient. It wants to perform. It is waiting for you to remove the interference. The path forward is clear. Clear the arteries, clean the diet, lift the iron, sleep like a predator, master your mind, respect your heart. The quit immediately command is not a suggestion. It is a prerequisite for survival in an age designed to make you weak. The choice is binary. Continue the slow slide into obsolescence or cut the anchors and ascend. The investigation is closed. The action is yours.